The rain battered against the canvas of Matilda Turner's wagon like angry spirits, determined to wash away her dreams along with the trail dust. Her fingers, numb from cold and desperation, fumbled with the flint and steel as she crouched beneath the meager shelter of an overhanging rock. 3 days on her own since the wagon wheel had broken, and now the skies had opened up as if to mock her solitary journey to Marysville, California. The sodden kindling refused to catch, each spark dying with a pitiful hiss against the damp wood. "Madam, you're going to catch your death before you catch that fire." The deep voice startled her, and Matilda whirled around, her hand instinctively reaching for the small derringer tucked in her boot. Through the curtain of rain, she could make out the silhouette of a man on horseback, broad-shouldered and tall in the saddle. As he dismounted and stepped closer, the brim of his hat shielded most of his face, but she could see the glint of observant eyes assessing her situation. "Don't come any closer," she warned, her voice steadier than her hands. "I'm quite capable of handling myself." A low chuckle rumbled from the stranger as he removed his hat, revealing features carved by sun and wind. "Xavier Eastwood," he offered, making no move to approach further. "And I don't doubt your capabilities, madam, but that fire isn't going to light itself in this downpour." It was 1852, and the California gold rush had drawn people from all corners of the country. Matilda had left behind the stifling expectations of Boston society 6 months ago, following the death of her controlling father. At 23, she was finally free to pursue her own path. That path had led her west with dreams of opening a school in one of the burgeoning gold towns, where education was as rare as decorum. What she hadn't counted on was the unforgiving terrain and weather of the Sierra Nevada foothills. Xavier studied the young woman before him. Her clothes, though travel-worn and mudded, were clearly of quality make. She was no ordinary pioneer woman, that much was clear. Her auburn hair, partially escaped from a once neat bun, framed a face that spoke of determination rather than defeat, despite her current predicament. "I've been tracking a stray steer," he explained, gesturing vaguely toward the hills behind him. "Didn't expect to find a lady out here alone." His eyes drifted to the wagon with its broken wheel. "Appears you've had some trouble." Matilda straightened her spine, dignity overriding discomfort. "Nothing I cannot overcome. The wheel will be repaired once the rain stops, and I'll be on my way to Marysville." "Marysville?" Xavier's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's still a good 30 miles northwest of here." "And if you don't mind my saying, madam, you won't be getting anywhere without a fire tonight. The temperature drops fast in these hills." Before she could protest further, he moved methodically around her failed attempt at a campfire. With practiced efficiency, he scraped away the wet ground until he reached drier soil, then reached into his saddlebag to pull out a small oilskin pouch. "First rule of fire starting in these parts," he said, kneeling down and opening the pouch to reveal dry kindling and what looked like waxy paper. "Always keep something dry to burn." Despite her wariness, Matilda found herself drawn closer, watching his hands work with a sureness she envied. He arranged the kindling in a teepee formation, then surrounded it with the larger, damper sticks she'd gathered earlier. "The trick is to start small," he explained, not looking up from his work. "Get the heart of it burning strong before adding the wet wood. The heat will dry it out enough to catch." From his vest pocket, he produced a tinderbox far more sophisticated than her simple flint and steel. "Where are you from, Mr. Eastwood?" she asked, curiosity momentarily overcoming caution. "Originally Kentucky," he replied, striking a spark that caught immediately on his prepared tinder. "Been in California since '48, came for gold, stayed for the cattle." He gently blew on the embryonic flame, coaxing it to grow. "And you, madam, you're a long way from wherever you started." "Boston," she answered, mesmerized by the small flame taking hold. "And please call me Matilda. Matilda Turner." Xavier nodded, still focused on the fire. "Miss Turner, then. What brings a Boston lady all the way to Marysville? Not many come this far without a husband or family." The implied question hung between them as the flames grew stronger, casting dancing shadows across their faces. Matilda hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing her story with strangers, especially male ones who might dismiss her ambitions. "I'm to be the new schoolteacher," she finally said, lifting her chin slightly. "They've built a schoolhouse but have no one to teach in it. I answered their advertisement in the Boston papers." Xavier's expression registered surprise before settling into something like respect. "Brave undertaking," he said simply, adding larger sticks to the growing fire. "Though I imagine Boston has schools enough already." "Yes, but they're not mine to shape," Matilda replied, relaxing slightly as warmth began to reach her chilled bones. "Here I can build something from the ground up." "These children deserve education as much as any in the East." The cowboy nodded thoughtfully, sitting back on his heels as the fire strengthened despite the persistent rain. The overhanging rock provided just enough shelter to keep the worst of the downpour from extinguishing their hard-won flames. "Well, Miss Turner, your fire's caught, but I don't think I should leave you out here alone," he said, glancing at her broken wagon. "That wheel won't fix itself, and these hills aren't always hospitable to solitary travelers." Matilda wanted to object, to assert her independence, but practical considerations won out. She was alone, miles from her destination, with a broken wagon and night falling rapidly. "I suppose I could use some assistance with the wheel," she conceded. "But I can pay you for your trouble, Mr. Eastwood. I'm not seeking charity." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Xavier, please, and no payment necessary. Wouldn't be much of a gentleman if I left you to the wolves, figurative or otherwise." As the fire crackled between them, Matilda studied her unexpected companion more carefully. He wasn't like the rough miners she'd encountered at stops along her journey, nor did he possess the polished veneer of Boston's elite gentleman. There was something solid about him, as reliable as the flames he'd coaxed into existence. Xavier set about making a crude shelter, extending the protection of the overhanging rock with canvas from his own supplies. He worked efficiently, saying little, while Matilda unpacked her meager rations. "I have some jerky and hardtack," she offered, feeling it was the least she could do. "And I have coffee and beans," he countered, producing a small pot from his saddlebag. "Between us, we might manage a decent meal." As Xavier prepared their simple supper, Matilda found herself telling him about her journey westward. The stage coach to St. Louis, joining a wagon train for the trek across the plains, and finally, her decision to continue alone when the others headed for Sacramento instead of Marysville. "Not many would brave the final stretch solo," Xavier commented, handing her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "Most wait for company." "I've waited long enough in my life," Matilda replied, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm cup. "My father believed women should be decorative and obedient. He controlled every aspect of my life until his death last year." She looked into the fire, memories flickering like the flames. "This is the first decision I've made entirely for myself." Xavier was quiet for a moment, stirring the pot of beans. "My condolences for your father," he finally said. "Though perhaps not for your newfound freedom." Matilda found herself smiling at his perception. "No, I don't mourn that." They ate in comfortable silence as darkness enveloped the landscape, the rain eventually tapering to a gentle patter. The fire crackled steadily now, a beacon of warmth and safety in the wilderness. "What about you?" Matilda eventually asked. "You mentioned coming for gold but staying for cattle. That's an unusual transition." Xavier leaned back against his saddle, which he'd placed near the fire. "Found out pretty quick I wasn't cut out for panning streams all day. Too much hoping and not enough doing." He sipped his coffee reflectively. "Ran into a rancher who needed hands. Turned out I had a knack for reading cattle better than I could read gold deposits. Worked my way up, saved enough to buy my own spread about 10 miles east of Marysville." "You own a ranch?" Matilda couldn't hide her surprise. He didn't carry himself with the arrogance she'd associated with property owners. "Small one," he qualified. 40 acres, 60 head of cattle. "Nothing grand, but it's mine." There was unmistakable pride in his voice. "Built every fence post and corral myself." As the evening wore on, Matilda found her initial wariness melting away. Xavier spoke of his life with frank honesty, from his childhood in Kentucky to his journey west and the challenges of establishing his ranch. He asked about her teaching experience, listening with genuine interest to her passionate descriptions of educational philosophies and her plans for the Marysville school. "You know," he said when she finally paused, "Marysville's growing fast, but it's still rough around the edges. The families there will be lucky to have someone who cares so much about their children's minds." His words, simple but sincere, warmed her more than the fire. In Boston, her aspirations had been met with patronizing smiles or outright dismissal. Even her fellow travelers on the wagon train had seemed bemused by her determination to establish a proper school in mining country. When it was time to sleep, Xavier insisted on taking the first watch. "Old habits," he explained. Never could sleep well in open country without someone keeping an eye out. Despite her exhaustion, Matilda found herself reluctant to end their conversation. There was something comforting about Xavier's presence, a steadiness that made her feel secure in a way she hadn't since leaving Boston. "I'll wake you at midnight," he promised as she settled into her bedroll beneath the makeshift shelter. "Rest well, Miss Turner." "Matilda," she corrected softly. "If I'm to call you Xavier, then you must call me Matilda." The last thing she saw before closing her eyes was his smile, genuine and warm in the firelight, as he nodded his agreement. When Xavier gently shook her awake what seemed like minutes later, the rain had stopped completely, and stars punctuated the clear night sky. The fire still burned steadily, testament to his careful tending. "Your watch, Matilda," he said, her name sounding different in his voice, like something precious. She sat up, disoriented briefly by the profound silence of the wilderness at night. "Has it been quiet?" "Peaceful as can be," he assured her, settling onto his own bedroll. "Just keep the fire fed and wake me if anything troubles you." Matilda nodded, moving to sit closer to the flames. The night air held a chill that penetrated her layers of clothing, making her grateful for the fire's persistent warmth. As Xavier drifted to sleep, Matilda found herself studying his features, relaxed now in slumber. There was something compelling about him that went beyond his handsome face or capable hands. Perhaps it was the way he'd respected her independence while still offering help, or how he'd listened to her dreams without judgment. The hours of her watch passed in quiet contemplation. Once, a distant wolf howl made her start, but the sound didn't repeat, and the night remained still. She maintained the fire as instructed, finding satisfaction in keeping the flames strong and steady. When the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern horizon, Matilda decided to let Xavier sleep a bit longer. She carefully added more wood to the fire and began preparing a simple breakfast from their combined supplies. The smell of coffee eventually roused him. He sat up, running a hand through his tousled dark hair, momentarily confused before his eyes found her. "You should have woken me," he said, though there was no reproach in his tone. Matilda shrugged, pouring coffee into his cup. "You needed the rest. Besides, I enjoyed the quiet." They broke their fast as the landscape gradually revealed itself in the growing light. The storm had transformed the dusty hills into a temporary green haven, with wildflowers already reaching toward the sun that now broke through scattered clouds. "We should see to that wheel," Xavier said after they'd eaten. He approached the wagon, examining the broken wheel with a practiced eye. "The rim's split, but I think we can bind it enough to get you to Marysville. There's a decent Wainwright there who can make you a proper repair." For the next few hours, they worked together to fix the damaged wheel. Xavier fashioned a splint from a sturdy branch, binding it to the cracked rim with strips of leather from his own supplies. Matilda assisted, holding pieces in place as he worked, learning the mechanics of wagon repair through his patient explanations. Their hands occasionally brushed during the task, each contact sending an unexpected warmth through Matilda that had nothing to do with the strengthening sun. She found herself noticing details about him, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, how his hands, though calloused from ranch work, moved with surprising gentleness, the low timbre of his voice as he talked through the repair process. "That should hold," Xavier finally declared, stepping back to assess their handiwork. "We'll need to travel slowly, though, and check it regularly." Matilda blinked, catching his use of "we." "You're coming with me to Marysville, if you'll permit it," he replied, suddenly looking uncertain. "That wheel's a temporary fix at best. Wouldn't feel right letting you continue alone." She should refuse, Matilda knew. She'd set out to prove her independence, to show herself and the world that she needed no one's assistance. And yet, the prospect of Xavier's company for another day didn't feel like defeat. If anything, it felt like an opportunity she wasn't ready to relinquish. "I would appreciate the escort," she said carefully, "though I hate to keep you from your ranch." Relief crossed his features. "My foreman can manage another day without me. And truth be told, I'm curious to see you safely delivered to your new post." They packed up camp efficiently, extinguishing the fire that had sustained them through the night. As Matilda doused the last embers, she found herself oddly reluctant to see them go, as if something significant was ending along with the flames. "It caught well," Xavier commented, coming to stand beside her as she stared at the smoking remains. "Good fires always do if you build them right." Something in his tone made her look up at him. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary before he turned away to secure their supplies to the wagon. The journey to Marysville would take most of the day at their cautious pace. Xavier rode alongside the wagon, occasionally dismounting to check the repaired wheel or to help navigate a particularly rough stretch of road. Their conversation flowed easily, picking up where they'd left off the night before. Matilda found herself sharing stories she'd never told anyone, her childhood rebellions against her father's strictures, her secret reading of inappropriate literature, her dreams of creating a school where girls would be encouraged to think as boldly as boys. Xavier listened attentively, occasionally offering observations that revealed his own thoughtful nature. "My mother was like you," he told her as they paused to rest the horse and check the wheel. "Always had a book hidden in her apron pocket. Taught me to read before I was 5, said knowledge was the only thing no one could take from you." "She sounds wonderful," Matilda said, touched by this glimpse into his past. A shadow crossed his face. "She was. Lost her to fever when I was 12. Father did his best, but he was a man of the land, not books. Still, he never discouraged my reading even when he didn't understand it." "And your father now," Passed on 10 years ago, Xavier replied. Farm accident. That's when I decided to head west. Nothing left to keep me in Kentucky. Matilda felt a kinship in their shared losses, the way they'd both found new directions after grief. We're orphans of a sort then, she observed, making our own way. Some might see it as a hardship, Xavier said, his gaze holding hers. I've come to think of it as freedom to choose our own path. By mid-afternoon, they caught their first glimpse of Marysville in the distance. The town had grown significantly since its founding just a few years earlier, with substantial buildings replacing the initial canvas tents of the gold seekers. Smoke rose from numerous chimneys, and even from a distance, they could see the bustle of activity along the main street. Matilda felt a curious mixture of excitement and apprehension. This was the culmination of months of planning and difficult travel, the beginning of her new life. Yet as they drew closer to town, she became increasingly aware that reaching her destination meant parting from Xavier. Have you been to Marysville often? She asked, trying to distract herself from this unwelcome realization. Every few weeks, he replied. It's where I sell most of my beef and buy supplies. Growing place. Still rough in spots, but decent folk for the most part. He glanced at her. The school's on the north side, near the church. New building, from what I hear. Matilda smiled at this confirmation that her new workplace actually existed. Despite the town council's letters, part of her had feared arriving to find the promised school was nothing but empty talk. Do you know many families in town? She inquired, suddenly concerned about how she would be received. Xavier nodded. A fair number. Most of the established families have children who'll likely be your pupils. He seemed to sense her anxiety. They're good people, Matilda. They'll welcome a proper teacher with open arms. His reassurance calmed her somewhat, though as they entered the outskirts of Marysville, she found herself wishing their journey could be extended. The past day with Xavier had awakened something in her, a sense of connection she'd rarely experienced. They passed lumber mills and warehouses before reaching the more residential areas. Even here, Marysville showed signs of its rapid growth, with new construction alongside more established homes. People on the streets turned to look at the wagon with its Eastern design, several nodding respectfully to Xavier as they passed. You seem well known, Matilda observed. Small community, he explained with a modest shrug. Ranchers tend to be recognized. We're the ones who keep the butchers in business. As they approached the town center, Xavier directed her toward a large building with a freshly painted sign. Marysville Mercantile and General Store. The owner, Samuel Jenkins, is on the town council, he explained as they pulled up in front of the store. He'll know where you're supposed to stay, and he can direct us to the Wainwright for your wheel. The interior of the mercantile was impressively well stocked, with goods ranging from basic necessities to luxury items from the East. A portly man with friendly eyes looked up from behind the counter as they entered, his face breaking into a smile when he saw Xavier. Eastwood. Didn't expect you in town till next week. Cattle drive go well. His gaze shifted curiously to Matilda. Not here on ranch business today, Sam, Xavier replied. This is Miss Matilda Turner, your new school teacher. Had some wagon trouble on the road, so I escorted her the rest of the way. Samuel Jenkins' expression brightened as he hurried around the counter to greet her. Miss Turner, we'd begun to worry when you didn't arrive yesterday. The council sent someone to look for you this morning. He pumped her hand enthusiastically. This is wonderful news. The children have been without proper schooling since we formed the town. Matilda returned his handshake, warmed by his genuine welcome. I apologize for the delay. If not for Mr. Eastwood's assistance, I might still be stranded in the hills. Always the knight in dusty leather, our Xavier. Jenkins said with a knowing smile toward the cowboy. "Well, we've arranged lodging for you with Mrs. Whittaker, just 2 doors down from the school. Respectable widow, keeps a clean house. She's been eagerly preparing for your arrival." As Jenkins continued detailing the arrangements made for her, Matilda became aware of Xavier gradually moving toward the door. When there was a pause in the conversation, he cleared his throat softly. "I should see about getting that wheel to the Wainwright," he said. "Make sure it's properly repaired before I head back." Matilda felt a pang of dismay at his imminent departure. "Of course. I can't thank you enough for your help, Mr. Eastwood." The formality felt wrong after their day together, but she was conscious of Jenkins' attentive presence. Xavier nodded, his expression unreadable. "My pleasure, Miss Turner. I wish you success with your school." He touched the brim of his hat in farewell, then turned to leave. "Wait," she called impulsively. "Will you? That is, perhaps you could call tomorrow. I'd like to properly thank you for your assistance." Something flickered in his eyes, relief, perhaps, or pleasure. "I'll stop by Mrs. Whittaker's in the morning then, before I head back to the ranch." After he'd gone, Jenkins gave her a speculative look. "Known Xavier long, have you?" "We only met yesterday," Matilda admitted. "When he found me trying to start a fire in the rain, he built it for me and stayed until it caught." The simple description hardly captured the significance of their encounter, but she didn't know how else to explain it. Jenkins murmured, his expression thoughtful. "Well, Miss Turner, let's get you settled. There's a town council meeting tomorrow evening where you'll be formally introduced to everyone. Until then, I'm sure you'd appreciate some rest after your journey." The next hour passed in a whirl of introductions and orientations. Mrs. Whittaker proved to be a kindly woman in her 50s who showed Matilda to a comfortable room with genuine excitement about hosting the town's teacher. The school itself, which they visited briefly, was indeed newly built, with rows of benches, a modest blackboard, and even a small shelf of books, more than Matilda had dared hope for in a frontier town. By the time she retired to her room that evening, physical exhaustion had caught up with her, but her mind remained active with impressions of her new home. Marysville was clearly a town on the rise, with ambitions beyond the immediate gold fever that had birthed it. The citizens she'd met seemed genuinely pleased by her arrival, eager for their children to receive proper education. Yet as she prepared for bed, Matilda found her thoughts repeatedly turning to Xavier. Their brief time together had affected her more deeply than she cared to admit. There had been something uniquely comfortable about his presence, a sense of understanding that transcended their short acquaintance. Morning came with clear skies and the sounds of a town already bustling with activity. Matilda dressed carefully in one of her better traveling dresses, trying to convince herself that her attention to appearance had nothing to do with Xavier's promised visit. She had just finished breakfast with Mrs. Whittaker when a knock came at the door. Her heart quickened as her hostess went to answer it, and quickened further when Xavier's deep voice carried from the entryway. He looked different in the daylight of town, still rugged, but more polished somehow. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, wearing a clean shirt under his leather vest and having tamed his dark hair. "Miss Turner," he greeted her, hat in hand. "I trust you're settling in well." "Very well, thank you," she replied, suddenly conscious of Mrs. Whittaker's interested gaze moving between them. Mrs. Whittaker has been most welcoming. An awkward silence threatened until Matilda gathered her courage. "I was hoping to see the rest of the town this morning. Perhaps you might show me around if you're not in a hurry to return to your ranch." The smile that spread across Xavier's face was answer enough. "It would be my pleasure." Mrs. Whittaker shooed them out with a knowing look that made Matilda blush. Outside, the spring morning was fresh and inviting, the town's muddy streets already drying in the sunshine. "Your wheel's been properly repaired," Xavier informed her as they walked. "Paid the Wainwright myself, so don't worry about that." "You shouldn't have," Matilda protested. "I'm perfectly capable of consider it a welcome gift," he interrupted gently. "Besides, I have an account with him for my own wagons. He'll add it to my usual bill." Matilda wanted to object further, but found herself distracted as Xavier began pointing out various establishments, the doctor's office, the assayer's building where miners brought their gold, the small but growing library that had been established by a former schoolteacher who turned to mercantile pursuits. "You should meet him," Xavier suggested. "Franklin Hayes. Started teaching the children here in '49, but found he could make more with a store catering to the miners' families. Still cares about education, though. Donated most of those books in your schoolhouse." They continued their tour, Xavier greeting various townspeople by name and introducing Matilda as our new schoolteacher. Each introduction was met with genuine welcome, often accompanied by mentions of children who would be attending her classes. "How many pupils should I expect?" she asked as they paused near the river that gave the town its lifeblood. 20, perhaps 30 to start," Xavier replied. "More as word spreads. Some families in outlying farms haven't had access to schooling at all." Matilda nodded, mentally cataloging the preparations she'd need to make before classes began the following week. Her thoughts were interrupted when Xavier cleared his throat hesitantly. "Matilda, that is." He seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. "I know you've only just arrived, and you have much to settle, but I wondered if you might permit me to call on you properly. Perhaps Sunday after church." The directness of his request caught her off guard. In Boston, courtship followed rigid patterns of formal introductions and chaperoned visits. Here, apparently, matters proceeded more straightforwardly. "I would like that," she answered honestly, surprising herself with her lack of hesitation. Relief softened his features. "Good. That's good." He gestured toward a small restaurant across the street. "Would you care for some lunch before I show you the rest of the town?" The remainder of the day passed too quickly for Matilda's liking. Xavier proved to be an informative guide, revealing aspects of Marysville's development that spoke to his observant nature. By late afternoon, when he reluctantly mentioned needing to return to his ranch, Matilda felt she had a solid grasp of her new community and a definite reluctance to see Xavier leave. "I'll see you Sunday, then," he said as they stood outside Mrs. Whittaker's house. "Church service starts at 10. "Sunday," she confirmed, suddenly shy. "Thank you for today, Xavier, and for everything before, if not for you." "If not for me, you'd have figured out another way," he said with conviction. "You're not one to be defeated by a little rain and a broken wheel." His faith in her capabilities warmed her more than any conventional compliment could have. Impulsively, she extended her hand to him. Instead of shaking it as she expected, Xavier raised it to his lips in a gesture that belonged more to a Boston drawing room than a California mining town. "Until Sunday, Matilda," he said softly before releasing her hand and walking away. The days that followed were filled with activity as Matilda prepared for both her first classes and her first formal introduction to the town's citizens. The council meeting Thursday evening proved surprisingly intimidating, as she found herself addressing the town's prominent men about her educational philosophy and plans for the school. "We're simple folk here," one councilman commented, "not Boston sophisticates. What do our children need with Latin and algebra?" Matilda straightened her spine, channeling the conviction that had carried her across a continent. "Sir, gold may have brought people to California, but it's education that will build a lasting civilization. Your children deserve the same opportunities as any in the nation. whether they ultimately choose to mine, farm, or pursue other professions. To her relief, her passionate response was met with approving nods from most council members. Samuel Jenkins, in particular, voiced strong support for her comprehensive approach to education. "Miss Turner is precisely the caliber of teacher we hope to attract," he declared. "Let's give her our full support and see what our children can achieve." By the time Sunday arrived, Matilda had organized her classroom, prepared initial lessons, and met many of her future pupils during their curious visits to peek through the schoolhouse windows. Yet despite this busyness, her thoughts had repeatedly returned to Xavier and their upcoming meeting. The church service introduced her to even more townspeople, many of whom made a point of welcoming her to Marysville. She spotted Xavier as soon as she entered, his tall figure easily visible among the congregation. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, wearing what appeared to be his best shirt and a vest she hadn't seen before. After the service, as people lingered to socialize outside the church, Xavier made his way to her side. "Miss Turner," he greeted her formally, mindful of the public setting, "may I escort you to dinner? The hotel serves a proper Sunday meal." "That would be lovely, Mr. Eastwood," she replied with equal formality, though she couldn't suppress a smile at the playful glint in his eyes. The hotel dining room was crowded with families enjoying their Sunday outing, but Xavier had somehow arranged for a small table near the window. As they settled into their seats, Matilda became conscious of curious glances from other diners. "I believe we're causing quite a stir," she murmured. Xavier's mouth quirked in amusement. "The new schoolteacher dining with the bachelor rancher, I expect, will be the main topic at supper tables across town tonight." "Does that bother you?" she asked, suddenly concerned about potential gossip. "Not in the slightest," he replied without hesitation. "Unless it bothers you." Matilda considered this. In Boston, such attention would have mortified her, but here, in this new life she was creating, the rules felt different. "No," she decided. "Let them talk if they wish." Their conversation over dinner flowed as easily as it had during their journey to Marysville. Xavier told her more about his ranch, his plans for expansion, and his hopes of introducing better breeding stock to improve his herd. Matilda shared her preparations for the school's opening and her impressions of the town and its inhabitants. "They're good people," Xavier observed. "Rough around the edges, some of them, but decent at heart. They want better for their children than they had themselves." "That's the foundation of progress," Matilda agreed. "Though I suspect some of the fathers will balk when I insist their daughters learn mathematics alongside their brothers." Xavier's expression grew thoughtful. "You might face some resistance there," he acknowledged. "Old ideas travel west with people, even when they think they're leaving them behind." He hesitated, then added, "If you ever need an advocate, I'm happy to speak with some of the more traditional fathers. They respect ranchers we deal in practical mathematics every day." His offer touched her. "Thank you. I may take you up on that." After dinner, they walked slowly through town, neither seemingly eager to end their time together. The spring afternoon was pleasant, with wildflowers blooming along the edges of the streets and birds calling from recently leafed trees. "Would you care to see my ranch someday?" Xavier asked as they paused near the river. "It's not grand, but I'm proud of what I've built there." The invitation carried weight beyond a simple visit, and they both knew it. "I would like that very much," Matilda replied softly. Xavier's smile conveyed his pleasure at her acceptance. "Perhaps next Saturday, then. I could come for you in the morning, show you the place, have you back by evening." "That sounds perfect," she agreed, already looking forward to seeing this important part of his life. When he finally escorted her back to Mrs. Whittaker's house, Xavier hesitated at the gate. Matilda, I know we've known each other only a short time, but I find myself thinking about you even when we're apart." His directness was both startling and refreshing after the circumlocutions of Eastern courtship. "I'd like to continue calling on you if you're amenable." Matilda felt a flush of warmth at his words. "I am very amenable, Xavier," she answered honestly. "I've enjoyed your company immensely." The smile that transformed his features made her heart quicken. "Then I'll see you again soon. Perhaps Wednesday evening. I need to bring some business papers to Jenkins, and I could take you to dinner afterward." "Wednesday would be perfect," she agreed. He took her hand again, pressing it gently between both of his. "Until Wednesday, then." The following day, Matilda opened her schoolhouse doors for the first time. 26 pupils ranging in age from 6 to 16 arrived with varying degrees of enthusiasm and prior education. By day's end, she was exhausted but exhilarated, having already identified both the eager learners and those who would require more patience. The next few weeks established patterns that would shape her new life. Days were devoted to her pupils, introducing them to structured learning and assessing their vastly different educational backgrounds. Evenings were often spent preparing lessons and grading the work of her older students. But increasingly, her free time included Xavier. True to his word, he took her to his ranch that Saturday. The property, while modest compared to Eastern standards, impressed Matilda with its thoughtful layout and obvious care. The main house was small but solidly built, with a covered porch and windows that caught the morning light. Fields stretched behind it, already green with spring growth, while sturdy corrals held cattle of various ages. "I built most of it myself," Xavier explained as he showed her around. "Started with just the cabin there." He pointed to a small structure now used for storage. "Added the main house 2 years ago, when things started prospering." His obvious pride in his accomplishments endeared him to her even more. This was a man who valued creation over acquisition, who measured wealth in what he could build rather than what he could buy. The foreman, a weather-beaten man named Thompson, greeted them with friendly respect, clearly fond of his employer. "Boss has been talking about bringing you out here for weeks, Miss Turner," he commented, ignoring Xavier's warning glance. "Wanted everything looking its best for your visit." "It's wonderful," Matilda assured them both, charmed by Xavier's evident embarrassment. "A true achievement." They picnicked under an oak tree overlooking the property, sharing a meal Xavier had prepared himself. "Not fancy," he apologized, "but filling." "It's perfect," Matilda assured him. Touched by his efforts, as they ate, Xavier spoke of his future plans expanding the herd, possibly adding sheep to diversify, building a larger barn come fall. There was room in the fields of his imagination for growth and improvement, a vision that resonated with Matilda's own ambitions for her school. "You miss Boston at all?" he asked as they watched the sun begin its westward descent. Matilda considered the question thoughtfully. "I miss certain aspects, the libraries, the concerts, some dear friends, but I don't miss the constraints, the endless rules about what was proper for a woman of my station." She looked out over the rolling hills of his ranch. "Here, I feel as though I can breathe fully for the first time." Xavier nodded in understanding. "The West has its own rules, but they're generally about survival and decency, not artificial social distinctions." "Exactly," she agreed, pleased that he comprehended her meaning so well. "Here, I'm judged by what I contribute, not by my father's name or my ability to pour tea correctly." "You contribute a great deal," Xavier said quietly. "Already the children are talking about their new teacher with excitement. Parents tell me their young ones are eager for school each morning." His words filled her with satisfaction. "That's the highest praise I could receive." As promised, he returned her to town by early evening, but not before showing her a creek that ran through the far edge of his property. "My favorite spot," he confessed. "When ranch work becomes overwhelming, I come here to think." That he would share this private sanctuary spoke volumes about his growing feelings. Matilda found herself imagining future visits, perhaps reading beside the creek while Xavier worked nearby. The domestic image surprised her with its appeal. In the weeks that followed, their courtship progressed with the straightforward honesty that characterized their relationship. Xavier came to town 2 or 3 times each week, sometimes bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a book of poetry he'd found in Sacramento, fresh berries from his land. They dined together, attended community functions, and gradually became known as a couple throughout Marysville. The school term advanced successfully, with Matilda winning over even the most skeptical parents through her dedication and results. When several fathers initially objected to their daughters studying mathematics, Xavier quietly spoke with them, farmer to rancher, about the practical benefits of women who could calculate and manage accounts. "My mother ran our household books," he told one particularly resistant father. "Saved the farm more than once by spotting mistakes my father missed. Wouldn't you want your daughter to bring that skill to her future husband's home?" By mid-May, Matilda had fully settled into her new life, finding satisfaction in her work and joy in her developing relationship with Xavier. They had established a comfortable understanding, their connection deepening through shared experiences and honest conversation. It was a warm evening in late May when Xavier suggested a ride to watch the sunset from a hilltop outside town. Mrs. Whitaker, now thoroughly approving of their courtship, merely smiled as Matilda left with him, making no mention of chaperones or propriety. The hilltop offered a spectacular view of the surrounding countryside, with Marysville spread below them and the distant mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. They sat side by side on a blanket Xavier had brought, watching as the sun painted the western horizon in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I never tire of this view," Xavier commented, his shoulder warm against hers. "Each sunset is different, yet somehow familiar." Matilda nodded, understanding his meaning. Nature's constancy within change. It's comforting. They sat in companionable silence as darkness gradually claimed the landscape. Stars appeared overhead, brighter than Matilda had ever seen them in Boston's gas-lit skies. "Matilda," Xavier finally said, his voice carrying a note of resolve, "there's something I need to say." She turned to look at him, heart quickening at his serious tone. "These past weeks have been the happiest of my life," he continued. "I know our acquaintance has been relatively brief by Eastern standards, but out here, we measure things differently." He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I've come to care for you deeply. More than care, I love you, Matilda. Your intelligence, your courage, your kindness. Everything about you." Though she had sensed the direction of his feelings, hearing them expressed so openly still took her breath away. In Boston, such declarations would have come after months, if not years, of formal courtship. "I love you too, Xavier," she replied, the words feeling both monumental and completely natural. "You've shown me what it means to be truly seen and respected." The smile that transformed his features made him look younger, almost boyish in his happiness. "Then I have a question to ask." He shifted to face her more directly. "Matilda Turner, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Despite having half expected this moment, Matilda found herself momentarily speechless. Marriage had always seemed a distant concept in Boston, a potential constraint on her independence. Yet with Xavier, it felt like an extension of freedom rather than its limitation. "Yes," she answered, her voice stronger than she expected. "Yes, I would be honored to be your wife." Xavier's expression of joy was worth every mile of her journey west, every hardship she'd faced along the way. He drew her gently into his arms, his kiss conveying tenderness and promise in equal measure. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Xavier pressed his forehead to hers. "I don't have a ring yet," he admitted. "I wanted to be sure of your answer before riding to Sacramento to choose one." "The ring can wait," Matilda assured him. "Your love is what matters to me." They remained on the hilltop until the night air grew cool, talking of their future together. Xavier proposed a summer wedding after the school term ended, with time for a brief honeymoon before the fall cattle drive. "The house needs a woman's touch," he acknowledged. "It's functional but plain. You should make whatever changes you wish." "And the school?" Matilda asked, suddenly concerned about her teaching position. Xavier looked surprised by the question. "What about it? I assumed you'd continue teaching. The ranch is close enough that you could ride in daily or stay in town during the week if winter weather makes travel difficult." He smiled at her evident relief. "Did you think I'd ask you to give up what you love? Some men would," she pointed out. "I'm not some men," he replied simply. "Your passion for teaching is part of who you are, Matilda. I wouldn't change that for anything." His understanding confirmed what she already knew, that in Xavier, she had found not just a partner but a true companion who valued her complete self. Their engagement announcement, the following Sunday, caused a flurry of excitement in Marysville. Mrs. Whittaker immediately appointed herself unofficial wedding coordinator, while the town's ladies began planning a quilt as a wedding gift. Even Matilda's students caught the excitement, the older girls giggling whenever Xavier appeared at the schoolhouse to escort her home. In early June, Xavier rode to Sacramento and returned with a simple but elegant ring, a gold band set with a small diamond. "Not as grand as what you might have had in Boston," he said as he slipped it onto her finger, "but given with all my heart." "It's perfect," Matilda assured him, admiring how the diamond caught the light. "I've never cared for ostentation anyway." The weeks leading to their wedding passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Matilda wrote to her few close friends in Boston, sharing her happiness and extending invitations they were unlikely to accept due to distance. Xavier expanded the ranch house's second bedroom into a proper study where Matilda could prepare her lessons and store her growing collection of books. The wedding itself, held on a perfect July morning in Marysville's small church, was attended by virtually the entire town. Matilda wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Whittaker had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair instead of an elaborate veil. Xavier, standing tall and proud at the altar, wore a new suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and confident bearing. As they exchanged vows, Matilda was struck by how far she had come, not just in miles, but in personal growth. The young woman who had left Boston seeking independence had found something even more valuable: partnership based on mutual respect and love. Their honeymoon was a week-long journey to San Francisco, where they marveled at the rapidly growing city, attended the theater, and walked along the bay. For Matilda, the greatest luxury was the uninterrupted time with Xavier, learning the rhythms of their life together outside the watchful eyes of Marysville. Upon their return, they settled into the ranch house that was now their shared home. The summer days fell into a pleasant pattern, with Matilda helping around the ranch while preparing for the fall school term. She discovered an unexpected affinity for ranch life, enjoying the connection to the land and animals that had been entirely absent from her Boston upbringing. Xavier, true to his word, supported her continued teaching when school resumed in September. He arranged for a stable hand to accompany her to and from town each day, ensuring her safety on the rural roads. On days when weather threatened, she stayed at Mrs. Whittaker's, who had kept her room available for precisely such occasions. Their first winter as a married couple brought challenges, severe storms that threatened livestock, a brief illness that swept through Matilda's classroom, the everyday difficulties of frontier life. Yet they faced each obstacle together, their partnership strengthening through shared adversity. By spring, they had established traditions and routines that reflected their unified life while respecting their individual pursuits. Xavier occasionally joined Matilda at school to speak with the older boys about practical applications of their studies. Matilda learned basic cattle management, proving herself a capable ranch partner during busy seasons. It was a warm evening in April, nearly a year after their first meeting, when Matilda shared the news she'd suspected for several weeks. "Xavier," she said as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues reminiscent of that night on the hilltop. "I believe we'll need to prepare the small bedroom sooner than we planned." His puzzled expression cleared as comprehension dawned. "Matilda, are you saying?" She nodded, unable to suppress her smile at his evident joy. "By my calculations, we should expect our child around November." Xavier's whoop of delight likely startled the cattle in the nearest field. He gathered her gently in his arms, his kiss conveying a depth of emotion beyond words. When he finally pulled back, his eyes shone with unshed tears. "A family of our own," he said wonderingly. "I never dared hope for such happiness." "Nor I," Matilda admitted. "In Boston, I feared marriage would mean losing myself. Instead, with you, I've found parts of me I never knew existed." The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Xavier threw himself into building a cradle, crafting it from wood harvested on their own land. Matilda continued teaching until October, when Mrs. Jenkins, Samuel's wife, took over her classes for the remainder of the term. Their son, William Eastwood, arrived on a crisp November morning after a difficult but ultimately successful labor. As Matilda held their child for the first time, Xavier beside her with wonder written across his features, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "He's perfect," Xavier whispered, gently touching their son's tiny hand. "Matilda, you've given me more than I ever deserved." "We've given each other a life neither of us could have imagined," she corrected softly. "And now we've given him a world of possibilities." As William grew from infant to toddler, Matilda gradually resumed teaching, initially bringing him with her to school, where the older girls delighted in helping care for teacher's baby. Later, when he was old enough for more activity, he stayed at the ranch with Xavier or with Thompson's wife, who had children of her own. Their family expanded again 2 years later with the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth, a spirited child who inherited her father's dark hair and her mother's determined nature. The ranch prospered under Xavier's management, expanding to include neighboring land when it became available. Matilda's school grew as well, eventually requiring the addition of a second teacher to accommodate Marysville's increasing population. 5 years after their wedding, as they sat by the creek on Xavier's property now, their family's special place Matilda reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. "You ever think about that night in the rain?" she asked, watching their children splash in the shallow water under Xavier's watchful eye. "If my wheel hadn't broken, if you hadn't been tracking that stray steer." Xavier smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with the expression she loved so well. "I think about it often," he admitted. "How you were trying so hard to make that fire catch in the downpour, And you built it for me, she remembered, leaning against his shoulder. Then stayed until it caught. Best decision I ever made, he said simply, his arm encircling her waist. Though I didn't just stay until the fire caught, did I? Matilda turned her face up to his, still finding the same warmth in his gaze that had first drawn her to him. No, she agreed softly. You stayed for everything that came after. As the afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light over their children's laughing faces, Matilda felt a profound sense of rightness. Her journey west had been about finding independence, about proving she could forge her own path. What she discovered instead was that the truest freedom came not from standing alone, but from choosing the right person to stand beside. Xavier pressed a kiss to her temple, his presence as steady and reassuring as it had been that rainy night years ago. "And I always will," he promised, the words both a renewal of their vows and an acknowledgement of all they had built together. In the years that followed, their family would face challenges and celebrate triumphs, always grounded in the partnership that had begun with a fire in the rain. Their children would grow up knowing the value of both education and honest work, of dreams pursued and promises kept. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch lay peaceful under starlit skies, Xavier and Matilda would sometimes sit by their hearth, watching flames dance in patterns as unique and constant as their enduring love.